Hey everybody, this is Jennifer Hare from Jersey Family Fun, back with you for another Stories with Jen. This week I am excited to read for you Chapter 1 from The Dragon Whisperer from Lucinda Hare. This is a dragon fantasy novel about a young girl who talks to dragons. Do you think that's possible? Are you into dragons? It is a chapter book. It is meant for older kids or tweens. It is 26 chapters long, so I'm definitely not going to be reading the whole thing to you today, but I'm going to be reading to you Chapter 1, which is about 15 pages or so. And you can find out more about this book on our website. Crystal, one of the other members of the Jersey Family Fun team, wrote a great review about it, so she'll give you some more details about that. We'll let you know where you can buy it in addition to Amazon and so forth, and find out more information about that. But without further delay, let me go ahead and read for you Chapter 1. I'm going to go put on my old lady reading glasses here because there are not any pictures. There's a few drawings in the book, but it is not a picture book. So it's not one for me to go back and forth with you. And so the best way I figured to do this was just to read it to you there while you guys look at the title. You know, get your kids around. They'll enjoy this. It's about, first go around for me was about 20 minutes or so in reading. So get them comfortable as they're sitting in their pajamas, maybe taking turns brushing teeth, and you're getting them ready or whatever final things you need to do to get them ready. This is a great way to wind down and give them some wonderful dreams as they're heading off to sleep. So take a listen. Let me go back here to page 1. There, it starts out with a prologue. All right, so Chapter 1, The Battle Dragon Roost. And what I will tell you too, to start with, is that the dragon's name is a long name. There's one dragon that is the main character so far, at least, but it has a long name, so it's going to sound like two dragons, but in reality it's just one. This is going to hurt, Quinelda warned as the dragon's head gently battled against her. His hot breath licking around her, she spoke in her head where only dragons could hear. Pain is nothing. Dancing with dragons, the saber-toothed dragon boasted, baring his yellowing fangs. I am strong. Have I not survived more battles than you have years? Yes, Quinelda smiled. You have. From her perch on her dragon's scaled foreleg, the skinny girl jumped lightly down and stepped onto the circular metal gantry outside the roost. Sweeping the mane of blonde hair from her face, she called out confidently to the dwarf who straddled the dragon's broken tail. He's ready. Tangnos Bearhugger, dwarf dragon master to the Earl Rufus de Winter, grunted doubtfully as he took the strain. Now, he bellowed over his shoulder, his deep, gravelly voice muffled by his helmet visor. By the one earth, pull! Behind him, a nervous apprentice obediently pulled down on the pulley chains for all he was worth. The greased wheels creaked. The links rattled. The chain was cranked upwards, tooth by tooth. Slowly, inch by grudging inch, the winch that cradled the saber-toothed dragon's stubby tail lifted it from the ground, exposing the compound fracture. The dwarf gritted his teeth. His sweating hands were slipping inside his heavy gauntlets, shifting his grip. He grunted, then heaved with all his considerable strength. There was a loud crack as the broken bone slid into place, followed immediately by the dragon's bellow of pain. Tangnos ducked instinctively as white-hot fire licked around him, searching hungrily for a chink in his scoot-streaked roost armor. Dragonfire from the angry saber-tooth, known as 2 gulps and you're gone, blazed around the roost, and then, with a roar and a rattle, escaped through a series of pipes and chimneys into the cold dawn air. As the flame died, the walls of the battle roost glowed, cherry red in the gloom. Glazed bricks pinked as they started to cool. The job was finally done. Tangnos sucked in as incautious breath of relief and immediately wished he hadn't. Even filtered through his heavy mask, the supercharged air scaled the back of his throat and made his one eye wander. He coughed and shook his head at his own folly. Badly injured battle dragons were, as a rule, put down immediately. And quite right, too, the dwarf thought, ruefully. Healing any injured animal is fraught with difficulties, but nursing a bad-tempered carnivorous battle dragon that was trained to flame, disembowel, or decapitate wasn't good for the nerves. Even nerves like his. tempered by 80 years of experience, 65 of them on the battlefield before a hobgoblin cleaver invalidated him out. It was downright madness, even if that battle dragon cost 5,000 golden guineas and had taken 5 long years to train. Everyone knew that. Everyone except a certain young lady, dressed in an oversized leather jerkin, patched boy's breeches, and heavy flying boots, with a stubborn set to her jaw and determination in her tawny eyes. Already back in the baking hot roost, Quenelda was now casually scratching the battle dragon under the chin as if he were a kitten. Tangnost wondered briefly as if she had any idea what they had just achieved and how dangerous it had been. "How does your tail feel, 2 gulps and you're gone?" Quenelda asked politely, completely ignoring the terrified apprentice who was quaking in his boots. "It throbs," Dancing with Dragons, 2 gulps emitted milky smoke still curling indignantly from his nostrils. "But the sharp pain in your tail, it lessens, but it feels hot and it itches so. I will tell One Eye. Keep the weight off your injuries while we tend you." The battle dragon breathed out in soft acknowledgement and turned his scaled head back towards the dwarf and the apprentice tending his tail. His tri-forked red tongue flicked out to taste the air. "I'm hungry, Dancing with Dragons," he complained. As if in response, his stomach grumbled. It sounded like a volcano about to erupt, or a dragon preparing to flame. The dwarf took an involuntary step backwards, and with a shriek, his young apprentice fled the roost. Tangnost found himself gazing into 2 flared nostrils the size of old furnace doors. Wisps of steam curled lazily up with the threat of worse things to come. Beyond them, the saber-toothed reptilian red eyes watched the dwarf's every move with unhealthy interest. A goblet of corrosive saliva dripped from between the yellow teeth and onto the metal decking where it sizzled. Tangnost froze. Saber-tooths were notoriously highly strung. They killed at the slightest provocation, and usually could only be handled by the master with whom they had bonded, or by those esquires who had raised them from the egg. An injured saber-tooth was twice as dangerous. Unaware of Tangnost's dark thoughts, Quenelda slid off the dragon's foreleg and fondly slapped it on armored scale. "No! No! You are not to eat them!" she scolded, as she moved around to join her father's dragon master or any other wingless ones who care for you. "At Dragonstone, we have to bind your tail now and splint at it to keep the break in place. But the worst is over. We'll feed you again before we go. Rest well, 2 gulps and you're gone." "Rest well, Dancing with Dragons." The battle dragon settled into his stony nest, massive shoulder scales reverberating as he started to purr contently. Judging it safe to remove his helmet, Tangnost wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his gauntlet and looked into eyes that held a depth of knowledge far in excess of their 11 years. Quenelda grinned back at his sticky discomfort, at the craggy face dominated by a patch where a hobgoblin arrow had stolen an eye. The strong jaw and broken nose were framed by shoulder-length hair, bound in the right temple in a single warrior's braid after the fashion of his clan. Of all her father's retainers, Quenelda loved the near-legendary Dragon Master best. With the Earl constantly away at war, commanding the elite Stealth Dragon Services, or SDS, Tangnost was the closest she had to a parent. No matter how busy he was, the Dragon Master always made time for her, answering her endless questions with patience and humor, listening with keen interest to her views, as if a young child's opinion truly mattered to him. As she grew older, he often allowed her to accompany him when doing his rounds, especially on difficult cases like this one. And if he was a tough, demanding teacher, he was always fair and had a gruff heart buried somewhere beneath his armor. The apprentices and even the esquires might be frightened by the one-eyed dwarf, but Tangnost was nonetheless a hero figure to them. His exploits during his years as the SDS Bonecracker Commandos, the stuff of fireside tales. And like Quenelda and her father, the Earl Rufus, Tangnost passionately loved the dragons and other creatures in his care. "I think that the worst of it is over, but the wound," Quenelda shrugged off her heavy sweat-soaked jerkin, leaving it to fall to the floor. "2 gulps says it is burning him, Tangnost." "What does that mean?" She rolled up the sleeves of her finely embroidered shirt, leaving sooty fingerprints on it. "That is the poison beginning to seep in." Tangnost effortlessly slipped into his familiar role as tutor to the Earl's young daughter. We need to ensure the wound doesn't fester. See the streak of darker blue, threading beneath the scales, then fanning out from the break like the tendrils of a tree root? Quenelda nodded, listening to his every word. Smell it, the dwarf ordered. Frowning, Quenelda leaned forward and cautiously sucked in the hot air. She wrinkled her nose in disgust. What do you smell? It's sweet, sickly, like rotting fruit. Tagnos nodded. That is the start of an infection. That is why the wound feels hot to him, why he's so difficult to handle. Hobgoblins' weapons are filthy, and many are poisoned. It makes us fear them all the more if we suddenly drop dead weeks after a battle. If we don't treat this now and it spreads, Two Gulps risks losing his tail to gangrene. Then he won't be able to balance, won't be able to run, let alone fight. Here. The dwarf selected a heavy ceramic apothecary pot from a low shelf, removed the lid, and held it out to Quenelda's. What's in this, lass? Quenelda dipped a finger in and sniffed. She screwed her face up as she thought, testing the grainy structure between her fingers. Mandrake? Barkloam? Moonlight? A hint of appleweed? Tagnos gruffly nodded his approval. Yes. Why not push her a little farther, he thought. Why this combination? She didn't hesitate. Barkloam to heal the wound closed and healed. Mandrake to draw out the infection. Moonlight for energy. And ground appleweed bark to lessen the pain. Good, the Dragon Master nodded, quietly satisfied. Good. Ever since the Tagnos could remember, Quenelda had taken every opportunity to watch him and his root masters at work. Slipping away from her nanny and tutors, she would suddenly appear in the roost, sitting quietly, eyes bright with concentration, listening and watching intently as they instructed esquires in Dragonlord and dragon handling. With his 5 sons all dead in the war, Tagnos loved her like the daughter he never had from the moment he first held her. Once, when she was still a babe, she had disappeared from the nursery. A frantic search of Dragondome's vast stables, roosts, and paddocks had found her asleep in the battle roost, curled up beneath the protective wing of her father's battle dragon, Stormcracker Thundercloud III. She seemed to have no fear of these deadly creatures, no fear of flying, and they never harmed so much as a hair on her head. Before long, Quenelda started to explain how the dragons were feeling, even what they were thinking. Well, their moose masters had smiled indulgently. Lots of young children pretend to talk to animals. They were always having made-up conversations with imaginary friends, and so they didn't pay much attention. But the Earl and his dragon master did. When she was barely 5 years old, Quenelda had warned that Nightmare Nemesis had dreadful indigestion in her third stomach due to eating one half-rotten hobgoblin too many. Their roost mistress had ignored her, and the resultant flatulent explosion had flattened half the maternity roosts. Then, when she was 7, she knew that Sunset Spire had a fractured trapsum, even though the surgeon had declared her fit. The injured battle dragon had lived up to her name and reputation when she turned on the dragonsmith, who was grafting on a new scale, and toasted him and his 2 apprentices, leaving 3 piles of ashes and their greasy stains on the floor that took months to scrub off. Can't even imagine. Soon Dragondome's root masters and dragonsmiths began to pay attention when Quenelda chose to share her insights with them. There was no question about it. The Earl's dragon master knew just how great that gift might be, but he kept his thoughts entirely to himself. Tagnos? Quenelda impatiently tugged the dwarf's long battle braid, a childhood habit. She was looking at him quizzically. Tagnos coughed, embarrassed at being caught daydreaming. He put the pot down at Quenelda's feet, careful to hide his excitement if he was right. Apply this thickly, he said gruffly, mind racing. You know the drill. As Quenelda bent to her task, the dragon master turned to his young apprentice, inwardly cursing the fact that they were so short-handed they had to resort to untrained and untried youngsters. Helmet off, he barked, marking the nervous gnome jump. Make yourself useful. Now, Root lad, bring a bucket of tar and ladle from the cauldron, and make sure it's hot, mind. Sir, yes, sir. Root jumped to his assigned task. Don't dawdle. Tagnos growled at the stocky young gnome, finally staggered up with a bucket of bumbling tar. We haven't got all day. On with it, lad, on with it. Let's see if you've learned anything of dragon handling in your first season at Dragonstone. Mind that tar, he warned as the bucket slopped over the rim to splash his boots. It's hot. If you're going to scout like your father, my lad, you've still got a lot to learn about dragons. Now, he held the boy's gaze for a moment, take it slowly, like I've shown you. Sir, yes, Root croaked. His mouth was so dry with fear he couldn't even swallow, and he kept beginning to sweat heavily beneath the cumbersome armor. Ruth's father was one of the Earl's best scouts. It was a dangerous profession, tackling the hobgoblin war bands, but one that brought great honor and privilege. It meant that Ruth, his only son, had been given an apprenticeship at Dragonstone. Few commoners could expect an apprentice under the tutelage of one of the greatest dragon masters of the age. He must not. Root gritted his teeth. He would not let his father down. He would not betray the fact that he was afraid of dragons. Dreadfully afraid. But he couldn't help wishing that he had been allowed to follow a more traditional family career, such as a rat catcher's apprentice. I'm sure that was probably an easier job, right? Catching rats, maybe, than dragons? What would you prefer? It wasn't enough that they weren't in front of the dragon, in front of a foot-long fangs and a walking blast furnace. No, Root found little comfort in tending the dragon's tail. When he was 4, he had seen a man-at-arms decapitated by one casual flick of a spurred tail when he got too close to a battle dragon. The dwarf's head had bounced 5 times before coming to a rest at Root's feet. Root's heart fluttered. The air was so hot and his throat was parched. Sweat ran in rivulets down the inside of his root armor, pulling in his boots. He felt faint. He took off a gauntlet to wipe the sweat from his eyes. Hand shaking, trying to shut out the memory, Root dipped the brush back into the tar. The shell beads strung around his wrist rattled with nerves as he raised the dripping brush. Quenelda watched impatiently as the gnome boy painted on the hot tar. He was so slow, and he was doing such a bad job. The tips of his beaded hair braids were actually hanging in the bucket. Why didn't the Dragon Master intervene? She could show the youth how it should be done. Quenelda! Tagnos turned to go, his armor clanking. I just want to check on a case of bad indigestion. Keep an eye on the lad. Once the tar is on, call me and we'll get the splint on. Nerves made Root clumsy. He was making a bad job of it, and he knew it. He glanced up at the Earl's daughter, her hair tucked behind her small pointed ears. She was always so haughty, and right now she was frowning at him. Her lips pursed in their usual thin line of disapproval, just waiting for him to make a mistake so she could show him how it was supposed to be done. And why? Did she not have any roost armor on? Was she not afraid of being burned by the bad-tempered battle dragon? The great bells of the Dragonstone Help belfry struck the hour of the strutting cockerel. Outside, a cockerel oblongly cleared its throat and prepared to announce a new day. They had worked through the entire night. No wonder nerves were frayed. Quenelda sighed loudly and started to tap her foot with impatience, making the buckles on her flying boots jingle. Then even rhythm grated on Root's nerves. Picking up on her impatience, 2 gulps and you're gone, twitched his tail. Root froze. Tar dripped onto the floor. He glanced at Quenelda's back as she moved forward to soothe the dragon. She was so confident. Even her aristocratic voice made Root jump. As if she could read his very thoughts, Quenelda sighed loudly and turned back to him. Oh, do get a move on, she said loudly, raising her eyes skyward in exasperation. Root flinched, dropping the brush into the bucket. Boiling hot tar splashed on his unprotected hand, burning it badly. He muffled a cry. Quick! The Earl's daughter swiftly guided the youth round the dragon toward the water trough. Keeping a firm hold on his armor, she plunged his arm into the sweeping water up to his elbow. Into the freezing water, up to his elbow. What are you doing? Root was almost weeping with pain. If you're going to work with battle dragons, Quenelda said sharply, you had better learn how to treat burns. Cold water will stop the burning. Keep your hand in there. She opened one of the small pouches on her flying belt and withdrew a small glass pot. Hand, she ordered him brusquely. Trying not to show pain, Root held it out. Tsk. Quenelda clucked with disapproval. You shouldn't have taken your gauntlet off. Surely you know that by now. The back and fingers of Root's left hand were raw and angry. The blistered skin was already peeling off. The cold water had indeed taken the edge off the pain, as she promised. The sticky green paste was soothing, although it did nothing to cool Root's flaming cheeks. He grinded his teeth. Why must she always treat him like a child? This should take the heat out of it. Quenelda spread the ointment on thickly, then cut a strip from the dragon's bandages with her sickle-shaped flying knife and wrapped Root's hands carefully. Make sure you go to the hospital barracks and get this checked tomorrow. She returned to the salve to its pouch. It should heal quickly. The ointment is terrific for scale regrowth. But scale regrowth? Root squeaked before he could stop himself, looking at his hand in horror. He didn't want to grow any scales. But Quenelda ignored his interruption. Make sure you keep the wound clean or it may become infected. Thanks, Lady Quenelda. Root stuttered his clumsily thanks, but she was already turning away when footsteps were clanged on the gantry outside. Why isn't the tar on yet? Tangstry bellowed, making them both jump. Quenelda and Root shared a brief, awkward smile before turning back to the injured dragon. Half an hour later, the dragon master ran his eye approvingly over the neat cast iron splint that held the dragon's tail rigidly in the sling, and declared himself quite satisfied. Inwardly, he could barely keep the excitement in check. He had taken a great risk, not just with his reputation, but with his life. A gamble, many would say, if they knew the truth of it, but the Earl's daughter had never let him down, and he had not made his decision lightly. "Guard Quenelda with your life. Teach her everything you know," the Earl had commanded when he made Tagnos Dragon Master, "as if she were my son and Hare destined for Dragon Isle, but do so secretly so that none may remark upon it. The dragons love and protect her. They witnessed her birth. Who yet knows what that may mean?" And so he had quietly taught her as he had taught the Earl, and had watched as she outstripped her father's achievements at the same age. He had all the pride of a father for a daughter. Were she the Earl's firstborn and a boy, she would be leaving for Dragon Isle. Instead, everyone thought her triumphs were his own, and it was far safer that way. His thoughts turned back to the battle dragon. What an achievement, assuming they dealt with the infection, of course. As if sensing the dwarf's excitement, 2 gulps and you're gone uncoiled his long neck and turned his head to inspect their work, lamplight softly glinting off his red and yellow patterned skulls. Thor's hammer! Tagnos swallowed dryly, as a rush of adrenaline punched through his bloodstream. How could Quenelda be so utterly certain the injured dragon would not reduce them all to pyramids of ashes if she could not truly talk to him? Until now, he had not honestly believed it possible, had not dared to believe the child could actually talk to these creatures, could whisper to them. After all, others could talk to dragons, after a fashion. He himself could pick up vague images and sense strong emotions in his mind, as could all dragons myths with dragon masters. SDS dragon lords bonded with their dragons and thus flew as one creature. But that was the result of years of work together. But now he believed it possible. What else might the young girl be capable of in time? The consequences for the war would be far-reaching. Battle dragons were dying faster than they could be replaced. Imperial blacks only bred once every 7 years. Saber-tooths laid a single egg. Ever since the death of the old Earl, the hobgoblins had swarmed in ever greater numbers. If they could treat injured dragons and return them to the battlefront, the possibilities were endless. And the cradle that Quenelda had suggested for the injured dragon, he must talk to his cousin Odin on Dragon Isle to see if their 4 masters could construct something. "Is it done, Tagnost?" Quenelda stretched as gracefully as a cat and took a long drink from her leather water flask, then offered it to the dwarf. Tagnost nodded. "We're done." He gratefully took a deep draught and poured more water over his neck to cool himself. His ancestors came from the acrid desert mountains of the old kingdoms, so he did not suffer in the battle roosts as others did, but still it had been a long, sweltering night. Wiping his mustache and returning the flask to Quenelda, he turned to his apprentice. "Get to your hammock, lad. You look exhausted." He frowned as he watched the miserable gnome stumble wearily down the steps and wished that, in the absence of the boy's father, he had more time to devote to his instruction. A nearby dragon flamed, blasting a wall of hot air through the roofs. As the fire died back into darkness, Quenelda rubbed her aching temples. The stench of sulfur and scale oil, added to the tiredness, was making her head throb. 2 gulps, 3 stomach rumbled again, reminding her of her promise to him. "He's hungry." Tagnost grinned. "So I notice." "That is a very good sign. Well, once that tail is mended, he'll be able to hunt for himself again. Meanwhile, we'll just have to build up his strength as best we can. Marwood," he bellowed. "Sir," settling down into 2 half-cauldrons of coal, a groom ran over. "Increase his feed. Another elk and an extra cauldron of brimstone. We'll see how he's doing in a couple days." "Sir, yes, sir." Tagnost looked at the young girl in front of him. In the dim, flickering light of the wall torches, he saw that Quenelda's sooty face was smeared with grease and ground brimstone dust, and her damp, bedraggled hair was plastered to her as if she'd been swimming in the moat. Grinning it up at him, she looked more like a stable hand than an earl's daughter, and she stank. No wonder the grandly dressed young ladies at court looked upon her antics with scandalized horror. Soaked in sweat with his filthy armor, Tagnost ran a calloused hand through long black hair now tinged with silver at the temples, and supposed he looked no better. He found himself smiling back wholeheartedly. Quenelda was so like her father in character, adventurous and strong-willed, and flying dragons was as natural to her as breathing. It was no surprise that she was determined to follow his footsteps into the SDS. A breathtaking ambition, but one unlikely to succeed. No woman, save those of royal blood, had even set foot on Dragon Isle since the Academy's founding in the century of the Canny Stoat, let alone taken to the skies on a battle dragon. Warily, the pair descended to the middle gantry. Tagnos looked around and sighed. The never-ending Third Goblin War had brutally culled the number of battle dragons under his care. Since the year's spring campaign had begun, 3 more stalls in the Saber-Tooth Roost now lay empty and silent. These dragons and many of their flight crew would never be returning home. It was a toll that was increasing almost monthly. Following the Dragon Master's resigned glance, Quenelda shivered with revulsion. It was widely known that hobgoblins enjoyed dragon meat as a delicacy, and the dragon bones were highly prized as armor. They believed it made them invulnerable to sorcerers' weapons and dragon attacks. With a nod, Tagnos turned off into the tack room to change the ceramic armor for his chainmail, hauberk, leather jerkin, studded boots, and weaponry. Head spinning with exhaustion, Quenelda stepped outside the battle roost into the early dawn. Cold, sharp air washed over her like a bucket of water, sending a delicious shiver up her spine. She raised her eyebrows to where the plump harvest moon shone gold in a rapidly lightening sky. By the time the twin sickles of the hunter's moon rose in 2 weeks' time, her father would be home. She could barely contain her excitement. When Tagnos first proposed that they treat an injured battle dragon who had broken his tail and crushed his master to death when he crash-landed on her hobgoblin attack, Quenelda had thought he was jesting. The agonized and grieving Saber-Tooth had flamed at anyone who came within 50 feet, until the Earl's Dragon Master arrived, Quenelda behind him. Then the battle dragon immediately calmed, allowing them close enough to inspect his injuries and wounds. She was so lucky, Quenelda thought. The dwarf could do anything with dragons. No wonder Lord Hugo Mandrake, the Grand Master himself, had offered him a place when he had been invalided out of the Bonecrackers, but Tagnos had preferred to stay with his Earl at Dragonstone, where his reputation as Dragon Master soon eclipsed his legendary feats on the battlefield. And now this. 2 gulps and Yurgon would live to fight another battle. One of her father's favorite battle dragons was going to return to the war. Not even Dragile, with her high magic and battle mage, had managed that. With Tagnos as her tutor, with her father the commander of the SDS, surely now she could do what no other girl had ever done, win a coveted place at the elite SDS Battle Academy on Dragon Isle. And that is Chapter 1 of The Dragon Whisperer by Lucinda Hare. Are you pulled into the story now? Do you want to know what happens next? I mean, are they going to win against these battle goblins? Or are they going to be able to continue to heal other dragons? Is she going to get to join the league that she wants? Is she going to go where no girl, no woman has gone before? Get the book. Find out. Because, like I said, 26 chapters. There's so much more to read to this book. You can read it alone. You can read it with your parents. You're going to want this. And it's part of a series. So once you fall in love with this book, there are other dragon stories by Lucinda Hare that you can check out. And you can get more information about this and read Crystal's take on it on the Jersey Family Fun website. Just search for Dragon. Thanks so much for watching, and see you next time.